For a conversation on national challenges and local solutions, please welcome Rob Breymaier, Executive Director of the Oak Park Regional Housing Center, and Maria Torres-Springer, Commissioner of New York City's Department of Housing and Preservation and Development. Back to lead the conversation, the Atlantic's Gillian White.
So I think thus far we've been able to talk about the Fair Housing Act kind of at the bird's eye view, and then also we've had personal stories. I want you to discuss a little bit about your role in thinking about fair housing and then implementing that in your cities. Maria, you want to start?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. So I'm the Commissioner of the New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development. Our work is to advance the housing plan in New York, where we've set really ambitious goals to build and preserve affordable housing. It's about 300,000 homes through 2026. And really the work that we do with the agency, together with many different sister agencies, reflects in many ways what the story is of New York. And so on one hand, it's a story, and continues to be one, of growth, all-time population high, all-time high in terms of jobs, continues to be a city that has an embarrassment of riches in terms of cultural institutions, et cetera. But of course, it's also a story of too many inequities, of incredible rent burden, for instance, on the part of too many New Yorkers. And it's a story that reflects the story of many cities across this country, shaped by a history, legacy, decades of inequities and discrimination. And so as we, 50 years, and it's been spoken a lot about today after the passage of the Fair Housing Act, we believe that our work has to be not just about reflecting on that history, the good and the bad, but really about taking it as far as we can, advancing the work as far as we can in order to create inclusive communities, to promote choice, to make sure that we're really increasing access to opportunity for New Yorkers. And it's grounded really in a balanced approach in making sure that we're doing, from a housing policy perspective, all of the things that we need to do in order both to give people the ability to reach a little bit higher, to access opportunities in neighborhoods across the city. We do that through a number of programs, changes in zoning that ensure that we have affordable housing in higher income neighborhoods, while at the same time looking at place-based initiatives where we're building affordable housing, but pairing that with investments in infrastructure, in parks, in schools, and a lot of work to combat displacement. Because part of the choice that we want to make sure exists in New York is the choice to be able to stay and live and thrive in neighborhoods that New Yorkers have really built. And they were there in good times and in bad times. And so it's really through the combination of those tools that we hope that we don't squander this opportunity that we have to keep furthering this really important but challenging work.
Can you talk a little bit about your work in Oak Park?
Sure. So I run a nonprofit organization that exists in Oak Park, Illinois, and we got started a little over, almost about 50 years ago. And the work that we do is based on a mission to achieve meaningful and lasting racial diversity in the community. And so Oak Park, if you don't know it, is right next to the city of Chicago. We border it directly to the west, and it's about 52,000 people in 4.5 square miles. So it's a moderately dense community. It feels like you're still in the city. The L goes to it. So we had to really make sure that we came up with a plan that, as the city of Chicago changed on the west side from being basically 90% white to 90% black in a very, very quick period, the folks in Oak Park recognized that that was probably going to happen there too. And instead, what we could do is try to figure out a way to embrace integration, so that what that means is that we not only have people from all sorts of diverse backgrounds. At that time, it was mostly about black and white, but today it's about every racial group. And we can build a community where they all live together. In other words, we don't have a segregated part of our community where one group lives and another group lives somewhere else. And that has helped us build a community culture around the idea that this should be a place that's inclusive, that we should be trying to build more equitable structures, and that everyone has a place everyone has a way to become part of our community.
Maria, New York has decided to move ahead with affirmatively furthering fair housing despite the current administration's decision to kind of push that deadline back. I want to talk a little bit about why New York chose to do that, and then also what it means to be doing it despite kind of the lack of a federal push to do that.
Yes, so the original deadline for our submission of our assessment of fair housing was 2019. Of course, we learned earlier this year that HUD has chosen to delay the implementation of the rule. We in New York are moving forward because for two main reasons. One is a real recognition on the part of the leaders of the city and the community, and certainly us at HPD, that this work of furthering fair housing, it's certainly a marathon, but what it is, it's a relay. And that we have now, me in my role, I've been given the baton. I'm not going to drop it. And the work takes a long time. And the decision to delay the implementation of the rule, we think is an irresponsible decision that really rolls back a lot of the progress and a lot of the commitment. It is not the time to put the brakes on this work. It doesn't mean that the work is going to be easy. We just launched, Gillian, as you mentioned, our comprehensive fair housing planning process. We're calling it Where We Live NYC. It will be 2 years of not just policy analysis, but really engagement with the community. Because part of what I think really needs to be central to this work, as it has been in so many communities, but for us in New York, it's of course a very different context. The neighborhoods in New York are very different from each other and very different from neighborhoods across the country. We need to engage real human beings in what it means for them to live where they live, what that means in terms of access to opportunity, and what they want and what they believe needs to be done given that experience, not just by local government, local, state, and federal government, in order for us to make sure we actually have, as much as we can, diverse and livable neighborhoods. And so we're moving full steam ahead with that work. We've already launched the engagement process. And at the end of the process in 2019, the original deadline, our commitment is to make sure that we will not have just run a robust and meaningful process, but we will have recommitted ourselves to very specific goals, very specific strategies to continue this work. As I mentioned, we have a balanced approach right now. It doesn't mean we have all the answers, but it's critical to us that we are really engaging our citizens and are as aggressive as possible in the furthering of the work.
Rob, you talked a little bit about the goal of sustained integration and how it requires being proactive versus reactive, which I think is what ends up happening in a lot of communities. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you think about being proactive, and then also what those conversations actually look like on the ground?
Right, yeah. So this is really the genius of what we created. So when Oak Park started this work and the housing center was created, the community was 99% white. We knew that change was going to happen, and we knew that we needed to embrace that change in a way that was going to be beneficial for the community, as well as the new people who were moving into the community. And so what we decided to do is, instead of come up with the typical only have an enforcement mechanism, right? So we do have enforcement mechanisms. If people are discriminated against, there's a way to go about making that complaint and remedying the situation. But what we do in addition to that, and the housing center is critical to this, is we engage people when they're searching for housing. And so at the beginning of our time, we did it both in the home ownership and the rental market. Now we basically have trained our real estate agents in the community to take on the home ownership part for us, and we just do the rental side. So so for in that rental situation, Oak Park, even though it's a sort of middle class, upper middle class community, it's 45% rental as well. So we have a lot of rental apartments to work with. When people want to move to the community, they can come to us and they can talk to us about what they're looking for. All the landlords in the community work with us too. They give us all their listings and they tell us what's available and they tell us all about the apartment. So it's almost like we know exactly what's happening in that apartment. So we can connect people really quickly. We can get them exactly what they're looking for, what they can afford, and put that together. In that process, though, what we have to do is deal with implicit bias, and what the research shows is something kind of like a racial blind spot, where even today, 45 to 50 years after we started this process, people still move to Oak Park, and when they first move, they have this idea that it's a diverse place, but because most places in America that are diverse are segregated, they assume Oak Park will be segregated as well. And so their race defines where they think they belong in Oak Park and where they should avoid. And that is constantly happening to us. So we have people who are helping them, right? We don't just say, here's your listings and on your way, thank you very much. We actually talk to them for a half an hour or so and work through this process with them and hear what those reservations are and hesitations are, and we get to learn about where they're trying to avoid and those sorts of things. And we can talk them through actually looking into those parts of Oak Park as well. So this is almost always racially based. And it has a lot to do with the fact that we're surrounded by more monoracial and segregated places. The neighborhood in Chicago that's on our east is 90% African American. There's a community on our west that's 85% white. There's two communities to our south that are 60 to 90% Latino. And so everyone thinks, well, we must have that pattern within Oak Park as well. And that's not the case. So we can talk that through and we can explain that to them. And their initial hesitation and or just ignorance of the parts of Oak Park that they were sort of avoiding goes away. And we can actually add to the number of options that they would have thought about in the first place and get them to think about moving in a way that would sustain our integration or improve it, because we're always trying to improve it. We're looking to figure out ways to help people think about that all the time. Just really quickly, if we do that, we know that about 68% of the time, they'll make a move that'll either sustain or improve our integration. So it keeps it going, it keeps improving. If they don't use us, and we know this partly from the data of when an owner rents to somebody that we didn't provide to them and they let us know the unit's been closed out, it happens less than 50% of the time. So if it's under 50% of the time, segregation continues. So we have to sort of have this intentional mechanism in place in order to keep this going.
So before I ask you guys a few more questions, I do want to let the audience know that once again we'll be coming to you for questions. So start thinking about them now. You've all already heard my spiel. Condense them down, make sure they're questions, and you can get your hands up, and we have mic runners in the audience. I want to talk about the issue of affordability a little because it feels like we'd be remiss to leave that out. There's just a ton of debate out there about what affordable housing that works actually looks like, both in sustaining actual affordability and in integrating communities. I'm wondering how you guys are thinking about that as you move forward and what you think the most successful models are.
Yeah. So what we're pursuing in New York, and of course, like with many cities, the affordability crisis is quite dire. We've been in a housing emergency for 3 decades. It continues. 30% of our renters are severely rent burdened, paying more than 50% of their income on rent. And so we have, as I mentioned earlier, what we believe to be the most ambitious plan to create and preserve affordable housing. I get asked all the time, affordable for whom? What does that really look like? So the plan is intended to meet the needs of a wide variety of families from different income levels, because the need is really dire, not just for extremely low-income families, but for working class people in New York City, the firefighters, the nurses, the teachers who built the city and feel like they're losing their grip on it. So that thus far, a third of the units the homes that we've produced, it's about 88,000 so far, are for people who are extremely low and very low income families. In the last year, it's actually close to 50%. So we certainly understand that we have to provide the types of homes for those who are most rent burdened. There's a big piece of this, given the commitment to fair housing, that's making sure that the homes are built in all of the neighborhoods in New York. And so there are places where we have land, or where land costs are reasonable enough such that those are the projects that get assembled by our development partners, and we provide subsidy and we build affordable housing there. But one of the key policy initiatives of the de Blasio administration, which we really believe will pay dividends into the future, is our new mandatory inclusionary housing policy. So now, anywhere in the city that is zoned for new residential growth, you have to provide affordable housing, 20 to 25% permanently affordable housing. This is anywhere in the city. And of course, this means that we're able to get affordable housing in higher income neighborhoods. So that it's a key policy. It pairs with all of the work that is happening in other neighborhoods of the city. And an important part of this is where we're building in lower income neighborhoods, it's not just the housing, because I think a big part of this work is understanding that we have to connect the dots between housing and health and jobs and safety and parks. And the last thing I'll say, because the affordability crisis in New York is of a particular type, there is a lot of work on anti-displacement that we've really been focusing on, providing, for example, free lawyers if you're a low-income resident in housing court, ensuring that we're combating harassment against landlords who are using unsavory practices. And so all of those tools come together. It's not, it can't work everywhere. I'm sure there are things that we still need to do in New York, but those are the main levers that we're pulling.
Rob, can you talk a
So
little bit?
the affordable housing issue in Oak Park is something that's a more recent phenomenon. Over the last 10 years, for sure, it's definitely become something that's much more top of mind of residents in the community. And the reason for that is again, going back to our racial integration strategy, that actually is a situation in which as we became less white and more diverse and more integrated, we started to see our property values go up. So, and they went up at a fairly rapid rate. And it's because we were creating a community that there was much more demand for than we had supply of. So in other words, there are a lot more people who want to live in a place like Oak Park than there are Oak Parks in the world. And there certainly are no other Oak Parks really. There's a couple other communities in the whole Chicago region that are much smaller than Oak Park. They're only like 10,000 to 12,000 people. So there's not a whole lot of opportunity for people to find a community like Oak Park. So we have way more demand than we have the supply to deal with. And what that means is our property values went way up. And that created some affordability issues. We've put into place, though, a lot of things, actually very similar to New York City in this case, as far as the folks who we're dealing with as far as feeling the displacement pressures are folks that are really like working class to lower middle class folks, right? People who make between $40,000 a year and $80,000 a year because they're not going to get any sort of subsidies or other help that we have in our affordable housing toolbox that really starts at the federal government and works its way down. And of course, people above those incomes are able to afford to live in the community. So what we have to do is figure out how can we do some things that will help those folks in that middle. We actually have our own housing authority, even though it's only 4.5 square miles. That housing authority has 520 voucher holders, which is about 6% of our rental market. And that's a really, really high number for a middle class community. It's usually like under 1%. So we have these mechanisms that we put in place for like the very low income folks in the community. But to try to figure out what we're going to do around middle income is much harder because there aren't really federal ways to fund that. You have to come up with local and private ways to do that. And it's a bigger challenge than even the lowest income affordable housing issues.
All right, we want to go to the audience right over there.
Hi, Linda White, independent researcher, Washington, D.C. So we keep hearing that integrated neighborhoods are better neighborhoods. Now, I'm an integrationist, but we've had a lot of all-black communities that have thrived, such as right here in Washington, Deanwood, Kingman Park, River Terrace. But in some locations, historically, the black towns have been destroyed with the support of the U.S. government. And Secretary Campbell said that even the government built the ghettos. So my question is, since the federal government is so responsible for the inequity in housing, what do you think is the case for reparations for housing?
All right. Does one of you want to take that quickly?
I'll try. So first I'll say that yes, integrated neighborhoods are a really great thing, but they're not the only thing, right? We're not trying to say that like every neighborhood has to look exactly like every other neighborhood. There can be variations on what integration looks like and what that sort of thing, and there of course can be I think we all feel a lot more comfortable in the sort of civil rights field about a neighborhood that is majority black and we're figuring out how to make that thrive versus a neighborhood that's majority white. I mean, that's always happened, right? So it doesn't feel as hefty of a lift. And it doesn't feel like there's a big a win in the civil rights arena. But whether it's integrated or not, what we need to figure out is not only are we bringing people together and helping them live among one another, but are we putting the structures in place that will make sure that we all get the full benefit of that too, right? So even in Oak Park, after 50 years, we're still working on that. It's not a utopia. We're working very hard to continue to improve on our strategy. But in most of America, if you have segregation, you also have two separate entities altogether. And you have way different levels of resources, way different levels of opportunity, way different levels of power and influence. And that really sets us up for disaster, essentially. And it doesn't hurt only the people in the communities that don't have all the resources and it hurts us all because we end up paying for these even bigger structural things that cost much, much more money and create much, much more disharmony and pain than working together to figure out how to build that back. So reparations, in my point of view, there's two ways to look at that. One is, can we do that because that's actually like not only a moral victory, but it's an economic victory for the country. We'll actually start to make things work out better. But we can do this through integration too by trying to share and leverage the privilege that white people have and bring other people into that community so they can take advantage of what's sort of natural for white people and make it natural for everybody.
All right, I think reparations is where we're going to end it today. Please join me in thanking our panel.